So Anand is SVP of product at Rula. He's been involved in product management for 10 plus years and has led teams of product managers at Gusto, Dropbox, and Zynga. He's a Stanford alum and teaches product management courses on campus at Stanford and in our online product management program as well. And Mike is a professor of civil and environmental engineering and a senior fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment. He is the academic director for our product management and advanced product management programs and teaches in some of the courses as well. And now I'll hand things off to Mike and Anand.
Thanks so much, Liz. And along with Liz, I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. You know, as Liz had alluded to in the Q&A session, please put your questions in there. Try to keep them reasonably general so that everyone can learn from the discussion. But I know that Anand and I are really excited to see some questions come in, and we'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A box throughout the entire webinar, and so it's great. Wonderful to see you again, Anand.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Mike.
So, okay, the title of this webinar,
intentionally provocative.
Intentionally provocative, and it feels like many of a series of webinars or a series of things that have happened throughout Silicon Valley history. It seems where one thing is declared dead, and then it comes back, and then we kind of move in these cycles of ups and downs as it relates to Silicon Valley and the economy more generally, right? So, why do you think people are saying that product management is dead?
Sure. I'll give a couple of different reasons that I think are probably worth going into. The catalyst, I think, for a lot of this originally was maybe a few years ago, Brian Chesky, who's one of the founders of Airbnb, got up on stage, I believe during a design conference, and said Airbnb is eliminating the role of traditional product managers. And everybody clapped and said, great work. He was like, hold on, that's not actually what that means. And everyone kind of forgot the last part. So I think that was the catalyst for some of the discussion. But in terms of why some people are celebrating it, why some people are saying this is happening, my take is I think there's actually two things going on under the hood that are pretty different. And one is a little bit older and one is a little bit newer. The older one is I think a lot of companies don't have great product management functions. And if you don't have a good product management function, it is often more helpful to have less product management rather than more product management. We can talk about some of the pitfalls here, but the classic thing that I've seen in organizations is confusing product management and project management. And when you have way too many project managers, that tends to be counterproductive. I think that's certainly one reason. Like, to some extent, some people are rooting for the function to fail. And then I think the other one, which is much newer, is AI is changing some of the way that product management work happens. And I know we have some questions we can go through in that in a few minutes. But those are, I think, the two primary drivers of why this conversation is happening in the first place. And happy to zoom in more on either one.
Yeah, you know, that comment that you had just made about the fact that the role of product management gets confused often with other roles like project management in companies is one of the reasons that I think that we're seeing this, right? And that the clearly defined role, because it is such a blurry role on the edges and sort of what the responsibility set is, it can make it seem like, oh, we don't need it anymore. And it would be declared dead. But I think that, you know, the differentiation that I make whenever we introduce the overall program is that, you know, project management is all about resource allocation and knowing a defined series of steps to get the project done. And normally we know that sequence of steps prior to the project starting. And the classic examples like a construction project, right? Where you're going to start with foundation and build up. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it is known. Whereas product management is a completely different set of skills. And that's why I personally think it's still very much alive and necessary.
I 100% agree with that. I guess as I have a vested interest, you're a little bit more of a neutral party, but I very much think it is still alive. And I actually think it's going to become probably more important over the next 5 years. So I might have a contrarian take here, but we can talk about why I think the importance is increasing. The short answer is I think there's probably never been an easier time to create software or do design using a bunch of tools. And actually the skill is knowing what people want. So that's the thing I'm long on. versus being a junior engineer, for example.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Now, do you see the title changing? Do you see the function changing as we sort of move forward, or is it just simply, look, this has been said, but it's not really true?
I've seen one way in which I think the function has changed in a general purpose, and then the second is a little more company specific. I'm seeing a bit of emerging of product managers and general managers. That certainly has always been true, but historically, sometimes there were general managers that had PMs reporting to them. Sometimes the PMs had GMs reporting to them. I'm seeing a little bit of a consolidation here. And for what it's worth, I don't think this is a change in any of the responsibilities. For the most part, once you are called a director at a product management, you are effectively doing a general manager function as well. But I'm seeing some of those titles changing. So more common in the past few years are things like head of product / general manager, which we probably didn't really see 5 years ago. But isn't changing the work on a day-to-day basis. It's still kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
To answer the other part of your question about the company-specific stuff, this is, so you mentioned that product management is pretty heterogeneous, and I agree with that. And one way of thinking about it is you fill in the white space of whatever that company is inherently bad at. So if you work at a place like Apple, where you have a very strong design function, your product managers tend to do less design and they tend to do more project management. If you work at a place like Google, where you have a very strong engineering function, and your product managers might do more of a customer-facing thing. Same in Amazon. So the product manager role, while you all have the same name, is tweaked pretty strongly based on kind of what the company is really good at and what its core DNA looks like. And in some of those places, I'm seeing it getting merged more with customer-facing functions, which I think is good. So product marketing and product management are coming a little bit closer together in some places, and I view it as mostly getting closer to the customer being a good thing.
I think that's right. In particular, as we see the role and the function maturing over time, right? We start to see a redefinition of titles within product management, because necessarily you are going to get more senior folks within the function, and they have to carry different titles than everyone just being a product manager. And so this is sort of a natural progression of the maturity of the function.
For sure. And I think one other thing that comes to mind, which I've seen more and more of, which is quite rare 5 years ago, is I'm now seeing C-level representation more commonly, like chief product officers. And actually more commonly, I'm seeing engineering rolling into those people. Where previously it was pretty standard to have a CTO and maybe a VP of product. It's much more common now to just have a CPO and actually engineering function reports in. And part of this is based on what drives the company. But for a lot of companies where if you're building generic SaaS software and the engineering is not trivial, but it's not a complicated thing, right? A lot of people in the world have figured out how to build SaaS software. What you're trying to do is consolidate the engineering function, the product management more closely, and recognize that the thing that gives the company magic is the product function. So let's tie engineering more closely to it.
Yeah, and of course that organizational change creates its own interesting challenges. We'll talk about those, and actually in some of the courses we teach on leadership of the product function, we specifically talk about how you want to bring together all of those functionalities, and how as a product person you can oversee and lead teams of those varied skill sets and talents. I think this is a great transition into trying to understand, okay, if it's not dead, how really has it changed?
Sure.
And specifically, how do you think the role has changed in tech and also other industries? Because yes, here obviously we're very tech focused, but product is a role in lots of industries.
Sure. Let me start actually maybe with non-tech. I have seen in my teaching a lot of non-tech companies sending some of their people to learn product management basics. And I mostly think that's a good thing. We're talking sort of legacy telecom companies, construction companies. Like I teach a class in the Graduate School of Engineering, Civil Engineering Department, and cross-listed in Management Science. We take people from every school. We have people from the School of Medicine, the School of Law. We have people from the School of Education. So I think there's broadly an awareness of product management as a tool for solving problems. And I'm seeing more and more people, if not taking the actual title, at least developing the skill. I've seen product managers at nonprofits, which I never saw 10 years ago. So to answer the second part of your question, I think outside of technology, there's a broad interest in figuring out how to bring these skills into the company and get closer to the customer to build more things that people want. And I view that very much as a good thing. Inside of tech, I think it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. And the reason I say that is we talked about product management for filling in the white space in a lot of these companies. And I think one of the places where people are frustrated with product management is where they're trying to fill in the white space on strategy gaps, but it turns out that an L2 product manager cannot fill in the strategy, or like the white space on strategy gaps. So you end up with a bunch of product managers who are effectively routers to different parts of the organization. But really, this is an organizational failing. It's not a product management failing. So this is actually what happened at Airbnb. I have some friends who were there at the time, and I reached out to them when they made an announcement. They're like, no, it's not that the function is failing. It's that it turns out that there are too many small individual teams. There's too much coordination overhead. But the reason that's true is because we don't have a strong enough directive around what we should be doing from a strategy perspective. So we are going to be much more tops down than we were bottoms up in the past. And that's the reason we're doing this consolidation. But product management to some extent is incidental to that problem. It's a company strategy problem. So I'm certainly seeing more of that as tech companies get bigger and a little bit more bloated.
You know, as we think about sort of outside of Silicon Valley, I loved your comment about like in our product management classes here, we're getting students from across the university, and you know, I think that this mindset of everyone has a product because everyone has a user or a customer to some extent, you know, broadening your viewpoint on what it is that you provide to others, whether it's a solution, whether it's software, simply whether it's a way to help them do their job. Viewing other people as the users of your output is a helpful way to think about connecting to other people, both in your organization and other organizations. And so it's not necessarily that you have to have a product that you're looking to launch and develop and get out there. Rather, it's a way of thinking about interactions with other people who need your work product. And I find that so powerful.
100% agree with that. Another way of expressing this is just empathetic problem solving, and everybody's doing that, no matter where you work.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So, you know, there are lots of different methodologies that we hear on a regular basis getting introduced, whether it's agile or sitting in front of a Jira board or Confluence or whatever else it is. And how do you see these having affected a structured product management function? And do tools like that make the role of the product manager unimportant?
Sure. I think they've mostly negatively affected the function because it confuses people what the function is supposed to do. Drawing a construction analogy, if your job was to build a house and you spend all of your time arguing about what's the best hammer, you've kind of lost the plot. The point is to build the house. So in terms of methodology, whether it's waterfall or agile or Jira or Confluence or linear, pick any tool of your choice. These are project management details. And like we talked about earlier, they're not really product management details. Now, I'm not saying product managers can totally abscond their project management responsibility. Absolutely not. You have to do some of it, and the company needs to be good at it as well. But I see a lot of mid-career PMs here get very confused. They spend a bunch of their time like, how do I Confluence harder or how do I Jira harder? And I'm like, it's kind of not the point. Like, sure, it's helpful to be proficient at the tools, but the thing that's going to get you and your company to the next level is not being better at Jira. It's being better at understanding your customers and figuring out the right thing to build. So I mostly view the dialogue around the project management methodologies and the project management tools as a little bit of missing the point. I'm not saying the value is zero at all. It's worth being good at those things, but it's way better to be spending the time talking about who is our customer, what do they care about, how do we generate value for them, than it is to talk about how you do your tickets.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you know, the analogy that I would make, going back to the construction analogy, is like you can have the greatest Gantt chart showing how every single one of those steps is created, and yet at the end of the day, no one wants to buy a Gantt chart.
You put the house in the wrong place, and you're like, well, it didn't matter what you did, right? So I feel this is the thing I feel very strongly about. My organizations, I actually push as much project management as possible out of the product function and generally into the engineering function. And the reason for that is it makes it very clear what the job is. The job of the product manager is to figure out who is our customer, what problem are we solving for them, why is it important, and how will we create value? Because it's the intersection of things that the customer cares about and the company cares about, and everything else is details.
Yeah, you know, this actually builds right off a question that just came in from Michael, saying like, look, we've been doing we're 20 years into the idea of product management being a role, and people still confuse this. What is it going to take for them to get it? And if I can provide my somewhat biased, somewhat biased feedback on that, or answer to that one, it is very much a standardization of what the job entails, and this was in part why we created the program of product management here at Stanford, to have a very clear definition of this is what the job entails. Yes, of course, it has other pieces to it. But there is a set of jargon, there is a set of nomenclature and a set of practices that, if applied across, really do define the function and the role in ways that you can start to push back on. This is my job, this is what I do, and this is the value I bring to the company. But what do you think? What is it going to take for people to understand what a product manager does?
I agree with everything you said, but I think the problem that is trickier and a bit more insidious to solve is it requires sharing control. And the reason for that is, for better or for worse, a lot of companies tend to be quite hierarchical, very rigid, and strong preference for top-down organization versus bottom-up organization. But at most places, there are certainly exceptions, but in most places, the people at the top of the organization are the people who spend the least time talking to customers. So what you want is distributed control amongst large portions of the organization, who have clear mission, who have clear strategy, and the PMs can be responsible for actually figuring out what you should build. But if you don't give them any autonomy or any agency to actually figure out a roadmap, for example, then you've forced it into a project management. You've collapsed all of the other possibilities. So to some extent, you have to be interested in changing what you're actually working on as an output of changing the function. If you're not, then it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Lightning question here. What project management tool do you specifically like? Not trying to advertise anyone, but is there one that you like and find
Sure.
good?
I've used a bunch of them. I've used Trello, I've used Jira, I've used Linear, I've used others. And my actual take on this is it doesn't really matter. Pick anything you want, anything your company is happy with, anything that works. I've used Asana. I've used probably a dozen of these in different shapes and forms. And my actual take is they're all pretty similar. Pick anything you want, right? If someone on your team is really passionate about configuring Jira for you, great, have at it. Like, have a nice time.
Exactly,
like, have a nice time, right? Like, but I usually leave this up to the engineering function to pick, because they're going to be the people who spend, certainly the product managers spend their time in Jira, but they will spend more of their time in it. So I'm mostly look, engineering function. If you're very happy with product management or project management tool A over project management tool B, that sounds great. They all work.
Yeah, and what I've told our teams is, does our organization have an institutional license for one of them? Because we'll probably just end up using that.
Is it free, or can you use somebody else's seats? Or that's all true, right? But again, going back to a point from earlier is, and I'm not suggesting that the value of these things is zero, but if you're spending hours and hours talking about which thing you should use, that time is probably better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we've been hitting some of the questions, loving the questions coming in the chats and in the Q&A. So keep those coming. So I want to shift the discussion now from, okay, is it dead, and how has it changed, to how do we stay relevant as product managers, right? And of course, the elephant in the room here is Gen AI.
Yeah.
Right. And how generative AI is changing the role. And so in order to stay relevant, how do we best harness AI in our day-to-day work?
Yeah. I'll do like a little bit of a side plug first, and I'll come back to this. If you haven't used a bunch of the AI tools and you're relying on news or LinkedIn or whatever to like tell you what's good, I very strongly suggest getting firsthand experience with them. And there's two reasons for this. One of them is always better to form your own opinions than getting somebody else's filtered opinions. But the second is they're changing very rapidly, including for whatever your particular use case is. So OCR wasn't very good 6 months ago. Now it's really good, whatever it happens to be. So there's no substitute for doing it yourself and being on the cutting edge. I'm not advocating anyone tool, pick anything you want, but just a a piece of advice that actually had all product managers on my team do is you need to be using them so you know what they're good at. Don't rely on the CNBC article you read about how AI is going to kill product management. So that out of the way, how is it going to change it? I think it's going to change a couple of things. So I like to break this question down into how it impacts engineering and how it impacts product and design separately, because I think the answers are different. In terms of how it impacts product and design, what I've seen it be very good at is dramatically reduce the time to a first working prototype. What I mean by that is previously where somebody might be getting into Figma or Sketch or Photoshop or whatever and drawing a bunch of mocks, AI is now very quick at getting something kind of working. But the important point here is kind of. It's very good at the 80% and it's very bad at the remaining 20%. It's one of my favorite descriptions of AI tools was it's like having infinite interns. You're like, yeah, that's kind of right. So it'll get you the first 80%, but it won't get your last 20. What that does is it actually splits apart what was previously a learning cycle and a work cycle. Where previously, if I wanted to put a prototype in front of someone, I had to make a hypothesis and then do a bunch of work to actually implement something that could test the hypothesis. The second one is now collapsed to not zero, but close to zero. So the job as a product manager is more important than ever. You still have to have the right hypotheses, but the cycle time on getting the thing right should be much lower than it was in the past. And that is a very powerful skill because now you can put 6 working prototypes in front of someone instead of one set of screenshots. I find that to be very powerful on the PM side, but again, it won't do the last 20% for you. So it's not a substitute for actually making it.
If I think about our double diamond framework,
sure,
right? We used to spend, and for those that aren't familiar with it, it sort of breaks the product management role down into a problem-focused set of activities followed by a solution-focused set of activities. And the generative AI piece doesn't necessarily, help you to a large extent with the problem-focused piece, right? Because there you still have to talk to customers, you still have to understand problems, you still need really deep empathetic learning. But that solution-oriented space, which, as you said, used to take us a lot more time and a lot more effort, we can now get reasonably working, minimum lovable type product ideas out in front of folks and iterate on that double diamond so much quicker and so much cheaper than we could before. And so where I see the real benefit is it's going to result in better products because we are able to get more options out in front of that customer for them to react to and tell us what they like. Because customers very often don't know exactly what it is they like, but when they see it, they definitely know it. And on the converse side, if they see something they don't like, they definitely know that too.
Definitely agree with that. And that's sort of a nice segue to the second part, which is how it changes engineering. What I've seen on engineering is it is a pretty good amplifier on engineering team productivity. If you made me guess right now, I'd guess it makes you somewhere between 20% and a third faster if you're really good at it. Most teams aren't really paying attention. Almost everyone is lagging here. For example, I spent the last week playing with Cursor, which is an AI tool. It is stunningly good at writing code. Things that used to take me hours to write, I can literally write in 10 seconds now. So I think that people have not caught up to the state of the art, and it's going to take a while for this stuff to percolate through engineering organizations. But once you figure out what you want from the prototype phase, and you need to build it properly to the 100% level, I still think AI has a role to play here. And it's hard to predict the end game here because it's hard to predict the end game of exponentials in general. But right now, it might make you, let's say, a third faster. So your engineering team should definitely be using a bunch of AI tools, whether it's Cursor, GitHub Copilot, whatever, because they're very good.
So, and I think that's exactly right. When we talk about the application of Gen AI, specifically within the product management role, we try to think a lot about not replacing your team, but augmenting your team, right? Because as you noted, it'll get you 80% of the way there on some things, but that 20% is still going to be super, super critical. And so how do you see, as a product manager on your team, the intersection of Gen AI with your own skills and with your own abilities at innovating in certain ways, and those skills on your team? How do you use this to best augment?
I do think in the medium term, for anybody who adopts these, either the teams will be smaller or the productivity will go up, and your company has to decide which one they care about, right? Like, is it better for you to test the same number of things with 70% as many people, or to test, I can't do the fast math, but 40% more things with the same number of people? That is a strategy question and like an org design question that will differ on every company and your cash position and a bunch of other things. But I think from a product management perspective, what it'll do is it will hopefully, to one of the questions earlier, it will hopefully push the role even further into the problem space, where they're like, look, the project management stuff gets easier, the execution gets easier, the complexity and all that stuff goes down. Now what really matters is, are you making the right bets, and do you have the right hypotheses? So I hope that it nudges product management even more squarely away from project management and more into the understand your customer piece. And to give you a sense of like things that are possible, again, I just happened to have been working with Cursor this week. They're doing 100 million in revenue with 30 people, right? That was impossible 5 years ago. So I do think you'll see more and more companies getting built that just have fewer people in them. But it doesn't make the role less important. It just means you probably don't need 10 of them.
Yeah. So just this past, just last month, we had, as part of STVP's ongoing series on mental health and well-being of founders, we had Reid Hoffman on campus speaking, and he was talking about his new book, Super Agency, and I thought it was a wonderful discussion around how AI and large language models can be used to give us all super agency, meaning like superpowers and super capabilities that we have never had before. And he commented on, we'll really know this is the case when you get your first unicorn valuation for a single founder with a single employee, all leveraging all that.
And of course, we're close, right? We're getting it with 20, but we're not getting it with 1 yet, right? The caution I would have on generative AI tools is, if you look under the hood of how LLMs work, fundamentally next word predictors, they're kind of the average of the internet, right? You're not going to get amazing company strategy from the average of the internet. So there are things that it's good at and there are things that it's bad at. If you want to figure out how to write code that OAuths to Google, though, you're going to get amazing answers from the average of the internet. So knowing where to use it and where to not use it is also super important. And I think you can't really delegate customer understanding to it, nor can you delegate company strategy to it, but it's very good at getting delegated implementation.
Yeah, in the chat right now, we're getting a bunch of folks coming in saying they've used it for rapid prototyping, super fast visualizations, reduced cycle times, all great stuff. And so wonderful to see those things in the chat. All right, so, okay, in light of all of that, what are employers looking for in their PMs now, right? If you're going out there looking for a job in product management, we have a couple questions with people coming from different engineering backgrounds, technical backgrounds, who want to maybe break in to the PM role, right? What are they looking for right now? And you as a head of product, what are you looking for in a product manager role?
I think there are slightly different answers based on whether you have a product management background or whether you're trying to break into product management. So let me answer each of them. If you have a product management background, I think the biggest thing I've seen is just that expectations are going up. Again, what previously used to take 2 product managers might now take 1 product manager. So if anything, the bar is just getting higher. So productivity, output, a bunch of other things, Gen AI is making those things not easy, but easier than ever. So someone put a quote in the Q&A, which I agree with. Product management's not going away, but the product manager's job is going to get taken by another product manager who happens to be good at AI tools. That I certainly agree with. So if you're trying to break into the field, I think the thing I think a lot about is what I call the trade. And we talk about this in our Graduate School of Engineering class, actually next week. So if you are a non-product management person trying to get a product management role, there is a trade to be made here. Otherwise, no one will be interested. As in, you must bring something to the function or the discipline that the discipline wants at your company. Otherwise, they're just going to go hire someone who has 5 years of experience. Why would they pick you? And in general, historically, there have been kind of 2 flavors of trades to be made. One of them is someone who has tons of knowledge about the customer. So if you were a customer support person or a salesperson and you spent 8 hours a day talking to all of your customers, there's a great trade. You're like, you know an awful lot about what our customers want and what makes them happy and what makes them unhappy. And I know a lot about product management. Why don't you come join the product team and I'll teach you to be a great product manager, and your job is to bring customer experience sort of into the day-to-day. Great. Another classic trade that used to get made a lot was engineering. Like this is a technically hard problem, or we have a platform team that requires more technical expertise, whatever. You know a lot about engineering or are an engineer, so let's make you a product manager. And very similar. In exchange, we will teach you product management, but your job is to be the bridge between the product management organization and the technical organization because you have a technical background. I think there's now probably a third trade to be made as opposed to just the historical two, which is you know a lot about how to use these tools and you are also on the cutting edge of them. So your job is to help teach the entire company how to be better at some of these Gen AI tools. Where are they good? Where are they bad? Like make everybody else better. So I'm maybe seeing an opportunity for a new trade, which I have not seen in the past 20 years.
Well, I think this brings up a great point that that Vignesh asked in the Q&A. So engineer by training, and says, look, as an engineer, the skill sets and the milestones in the career are reasonably quantifiable. Okay, that's a viewpoint. And asking, is PM more of a softer skills dominant role? And what are some fundamental quantifiable skills that one can master to be a good PM? And of course, I have my thoughts, but I'm going to let you go first.
Sure. I will actually answer the question in a second, but I'm going to side slip it first. The reason is I see a lot of people, again, get really stuck here on the skills development. And actually, the problem is that so for example, I posted a product management role on my team 2.5 weeks ago, and in 8 days, I got 2,500 applications, right? So in terms of how you stand out, maybe there are 500 people there who would be a great product manager. From my perspective, it doesn't matter. I only need one. So I'm totally fine with filters that disqualify people who otherwise are very qualified because I only need one person. And as long as I don't throw out everybody, it's fine for me. So I see a lot of people spend their time on things like resume writing or skills development, which is true and important. But actually, the problem is a game theory one. It's how do you stand out against your peers? And if you go spend 50 hours cranking through a bunch of JavaScript, maybe that stands out in a certain scenario, but maybe it doesn't. So I would very much morph the question of not like, if you're trying to break into PM, it's how do you differentiate more than what are the skills you can build? Because there are a lot of people in the world who also know engineering, and that's a hard skill to differentiate on. Putting that aside for a minute and actually trying to answer the question, I think there are hard skills for sure. It's probably 50-50, which is unusual for a role, especially for a junior role, right? Junior roles are probably more maybe 90-10 hard skills. But the hard skills that you can get very good at, you can get very good at project management and execution. That is a real skill that has to be practiced, and you can be very good at it. You can get very good at prioritization. That's another skill that becomes increasingly important as you become more senior. And then there are what I'll cheatingly call the hard skills of soft skills. What I mean by that is there are people who are more persuasive than other people. That is a real skill. There are people who are better public speakers and are more convincing than other people. That is also a real skill for focusing alignment. Sure, you can count it as a soft skill, but calling it a soft skill doesn't mean that you can't improve it or have some sense that you are better today than you were a week ago. So I agree that there are many soft skills that are important, but that doesn't mean that you can't practice them or that it's all nebulous.
I agree with that. I agree with that completely. And if I think about our overall product management programs here at Stanford, one of the things that we have done specifically with our curriculum is to try to transition those soft skills into very learnable, bite-sized things that you can practice, you can get good at, and then over time you will see that advancement throughout your career. And so, just like any leadership or management role, there is absolutely a skill set that is non-technical in nature, but is incredibly important to being effective and to being good at your job. And that's really what we try to focus on.
Yes, and again, being like wildly overly reductive in a way that might be unhelpful, but I think is not wrong. If you really want the two soft skills to focus on, it's be persuasive and be right. As in, it's fundamentally a judgment job at the end of the day in terms of picking what to do. There are many inputs that go into that. And then you have to convince everybody else that you are also right so that they go along with your plan, because it's not really a hard power role. But those are the two things I'd work on. And those are both very practicable skills. Something I actually have PMs on my team do when they're struggling with this is I have them in our one-on-ones, like write down and bring me all of the bets you are making. Tell me all of your predictions about what you think will happen. And then we would like to put in. There are some structured ways to do this and you launch a project, but there are many other ways to do it. I think this person will say yes to this thing and here's what they will say. I think this person will say no to this thing and here's what they will say. This like predictive power of not just outcomes of projects, but of people in general is an incredibly powerful life skill.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. All right, I want to get to a few more questions, and so we'll try to click in on some quick answers here. Lakesh asked, product management in nonprofits. Can you talk a little bit about that? What have you seen the role of product management in a nonprofit being successful? What are they thinking about there?
Sure. So I've limited experience with this, but I'll tell you at least what I've seen. That doesn't mean that it's general to industry. What I've seen is there is sometimes a misalignment between what the nonprofit thinks of its mission and what its customers think of as their mission. So if you are working at
and nonprofits do have customers. Let's be very clear about that.
Absolutely right. They actually I've seen nonprofits are more complicated, more customers. They both have a fundraising side of the house, which is a whole separate set of customers, and then they have the regular customers. So if anything, the job is more complicated.
It's like a platform kind of situation.
100%. But maybe to give a simple example, imagine that you are a nonprofit working on bicycle advocacy. And your customer is the city of San Francisco or the city of Berkeley or whatever happens to be. They also have a set of things that they care about. And if you just show up and bang on the door and say, here are all the things I care about, that is not a particularly effective strategy for making change. So this idea of understanding your stakeholders, whether they are government officials, NGO, whatever, funders, whoever it happens to be, and then trying to craft your arguments in a way that is mutually beneficial for the things that you want to accomplish as well as the things they want, is a super powerful product management skill. And it sometimes gets missed because nonprofits can, not always, have a focus on their mission as opposed to the intersection of their mission and what the people who control the thing want.
Yeah. No, it's we had talked about from the start that this is very much a mindset and a viewpoint of seeing your work product benefiting other people, and you have to understand what will benefit them the most, and where are you trying to get them, and that's how you're going to get them to believe in you and your organization, and whether it's to support your organization or to implement what you're suggesting. I mean, it all fits very closely with that sort of human-centric, user-centric, empathetic focused design. Yeah.
Agree.
Robbie asked, AI is good to get us to 80. Is it ever going to get us to 100?
That's a hard question for me to answer. If I knew the question to that, I would buy a bunch of particular stocks and short a bunch of other ones. I will say this: it keeps getting better, right? I don't know where the end game is of getting better, but it certainly hasn't slowed down yet. So probably the smart money is to predict that it will keep getting better, at least to some point. It's possible we're hitting diminishing returns on LLMs and we need something else. That is way beyond my ability to predict. But it is getting better, and it's been getting better since 2021 at this point. So I think it would be unwise to assume it will not get any better going forward.
I think it also means what we mean by 100, right? Yes, it gets us a long ways right now. Getting us all the way to what 100 really means is somewhat undefined in my mind. I mean, it's never going to go out there and do customer interviews and a lot of this other stuff, I don't think. But so it really depends also on like what 100 really is.
I have actually seen the 2 customer interviews, Mike. I've seen people write scripts that they feed into an LLM, and it does the speaking. So it just has a conversation with the person, and then it transcribes all of it and sends it back to you. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but someone's trying it.
It's a thing. Yeah, totally. Robert asks specifically for small organizations, outsourcing to Fiverr or Upwork the product management role. Good idea? Bad idea? Seen it before?
More likely than not, bad idea. And specifically, the reason is because the job of the product, again, let's assume you were doing product management the right way and it's not project management. Then your job is to figure out the bridge between your customer and your strategy. And both of those things are pretty internal, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying it will absolutely fail, but those are things you tend to want to know the best inside the building and also hold pretty closely. So I think it is hard to outsource. It's very easy to outsource project management. It's easy to outsource engineering, but it's much harder to outsource product management.
That's exactly the point that I was going to make, is that if you're going to outsource something within product, outsource the project management components of product, not the product management role on that. Product owner versus product manager. Is that the same thing? Is this just another title that's come out of that new hierarchy, or is that truly different?
It's just another title. It's usually the same thing, right? Product owner usually implies some level of seniority. Like I've seen it sometimes be interchangeable with group product or director of product or something else. It sometimes implies that you are the kind of the GM of a particular sub product or line of business or whatever, but it's the same thing.
Okay. Final question.
Yes.
Is product management dead?
I don't think so. I suspect it will be more important. I suspect it will be more important than ever, but the number of people required around it to get to great products, I think will go down.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely an evolving role, right? Much like every role. And as that role matures, as the function matures inside organizations, both tech organizations and those outside tech, yeah, we're going to see it grow. We're going to see it change. And one of the things that we are always trying to do within our educational programs is stay on the pulse of what it needs to do to evolve and continue to introduce those new concepts, frameworks, tool sets, approaches in order to support that evolution, rather than try to hold folks back. So I think we're in a strong agreement that no, it's not dead, but it is changing.
Just like everything.
Just like everything. All right, so we're here coming up on the end of the webinar. Anand, thanks so much. This was an awesome conversation. I want to bring Liz back in, and I want to thank everyone for their questions and the Q&A, and also say if you really enjoyed this, let us know. We have an extensive suite of educational options that I and Anand and the rest of the product management team here have put together. And if you like sort of the structure of the thinking, the frameworks and the kind of things that we talked about, we'd love to share more with you. But Liz, I'm going to turn it back to you to close us out.
Yeah, thanks so much. Sorry, getting over a cold. Thanks so much, Mike and Anand. Like Mike said, if you're interested in learning more about anything related to our product management offerings, you can visit our website at online.stanford.edu to find out more information. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.